My talk is a little bit kind of at the intersection of social neuroscience, but also arts and aesthetics. And I'm going to talk about the impact of contextual information and culture on art engagement. So first of all, almost all of us use Instagram, I'm hoping here. And this is an image of Instagram. And the impact of context on what we look at is actually quite visible on Instagram. Because if I show you this amazing image of a leopard in the Kabini forests in India, you're going to already have some judgments about it. But if I then give you some context in terms of its caption, the photographer here says that he's been tracking this leopard for 13 years, and this is the last picture he took of the leopard. That context might add something else to the judgment to how you evaluate this photo. So semantic context in terms of where this photo is coming from, who's taking it, and what the story is behind it really impacts how we look at it. And the same is true for art. So if I were to show you this image, and just give you no information, you might evaluate it in terms of its color, technique, whatever. But if I said the title of this artwork was The Bride's Toilet, you might think of different things. You might be like, why is it called The Bride's Toilet? Or if you're of Indian origin, you might look at their fabrics and recognize them as Indian. Or if you were an art expert, you might look at it differently and also know that it was maybe a painting made by Amrita Shergill, who's one of the famous Indian women painters. And so all kinds of context, culture, and expertise kind of shape our aesthetic preferences. And that's kind of the question that I want to answer here is, how does this exactly happen? So participants saw a bunch of different Indian and American paintings, and they were given information about the content of the painting, the artist, or the technique, and also in some cases, no information. And these were Indian and American paintings and Indian and American participants who viewed these paintings. So what do we find when participants look at these and get some information or not? Well, these are the results. On the y-axis is liking ratings on a Likert scale of 1 to 5. On the x-axis is the type of information. So in one case, no information. In the other, some information about content, artist, and technique. So in participants, American participants with high art experience or art expert, as we may call them, we find that there are actually no differences. So giving participants contextual information does not change their preferences, does not increase or decrease their liking ratings. Whereas with participants with low art experience, now we see that content, artist, and technique information all increase ratings of liking compared to when no information is given. So contextual information seems to have a higher impact on participants, especially those with lower art experience. What do we find with Indian paintings? Well, Indian participants. Well, when it comes to Indian participants, participants with high art experience are also impacted, but only by artists' information. So information about the artist changes or increases their ratings of liking compared to no information. And the same is true for Indian participants with low art experience. And what this kind of in sum tells us is that contextual information impacts both American and Indian participants, but the modulation of art experience actually happens differently across the two cultures. And so what is the impact of culture as well? Well, we all know about in-group biases. And in art, how this in-group bias can translate is a preference for one's for artworks from one's own culture compared to another culture. So in this case, we also find, for instance, here, these are American participants, and the greenish color is Indian artworks, and the yellowish green color is the American artworks. And what we find is that American participants actually like American artworks more compared to Indian artworks, classic in-group bias. And we find the same with Indian participants. So Indian artworks like Indian artworks more than American artworks. Again, a classic in-group bias across both the cultures. But what's very interesting is that when participants are given contextual information about these artworks, their in-group bias reduces. So their prejudice or their in-group favoritism actually comes down. So contextual information actually impacts artworks from another culture a lot more by increasing the liking for those artworks. So for unfamiliar artworks or for artworks from another culture. So I've talked about all these results, but what do they mean? What are the implications? How does it help us? So one of the things where the results are going from here is how it impacts the field. So obviously in neuro-aesthetics, There's a lot of research on the neural mechanisms of aesthetic experience. And one of the seminal models is this aesthetic triad model, which suggests that aesthetic experience is kind of brought about by an interaction of sensory motor systems. So in terms of how we perceive things, emotion valuation, so what we find rewarding, what we like, what we want, our emotions, and knowledge meaning systems. So the current findings kind of point towards the involvement of these knowledge meaning systems in terms of how expertise, context, or culture might impact our aesthetic experience. The other implication is for museum and exhibition curation. So in the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia, for instance, there are no captions for artworks, but we know contextual information changes how we look at artworks. So depending on the audience who's coming into a museum, what the aim is for or objective is for the exhibition or museum, contextual information changes how we view these artworks. It also has implications for art education. So if you're given more information about something, our biases or prejudices might reduce, which really makes a good case for why multicultural art education is important, and also cross-cultural research. So not all Western findings, broadly speaking Western, kind of translate to non-Western populations. And therefore, it's important that non-Western populations, broadly speaking, are also given enough importance. And it's not that we just generalize from Western to non-Western, but we look at non-Western artworks in this case, but also more broadly speaking for their own sake. And that's thank you to my lab with whom I did this work. A part of the results I presented today are available. They just got published last week, which is very exciting. And I'm happy to take questions and feedback. That's all, folks. Thank you.
Just another amazing talk, amazing presence, amazing style, beautiful slides, awesome topic. We've been really blessed with the talks today. These early career researchers have just, shown us how it's done. There's so little to say, but I suppose the first thing is more content-wise. So we did a little bit of work in this area, looking at a much lower level of stereotypes and outgroup biases that with extra information we showed that you can. So with top-down control, you can modulate. And I think in reflecting on that, so first it came up as, oh, that's like something we did. It actually made me think that that might be your party message, that we were talking about a couple minutes ago. That really what you could really say with this work, beyond just making better curation in art museums, is that you can fix biases, right? Just give people more information if they're willing to listen to it. And I think this is big. This is impactful, far beyond just, museums, which is, let us be honest, a place for people who have time to go to museums. I think you could have huge impact with your work. And you should spread that word. You need to aim big. I feel that people who work in the arts, I did a bit of work in music cognition. We sell ourselves too small by talking just to people working in the field, and we only talk about it in terms of art or music. What you're doing here is extremely important for helping people better understand these phenomena. So whether it's saying, look, we need to look at other cultures, or whether it's about talking about biases, I think these are your two big take-homes that you need to shout out from the beginning. So if there's any comment I could make, it's that, again, this party trick, which I'm not going to call it, that Siri suggested, is think about what's the big impact you could have with your work. Otherwise, I think your graphs are beautiful. I mean, you make beautiful plots, but maybe the color choices, although stylistic, make it a little bit hard to differentiate the two greens. I love it. It's beautiful. But, you need to make it as clear as possible where those distinctions are between the two groups. And the font size could be a little bit bigger. Again, this is that fine tooth comb that you take, 15th edit in fixing when you're working for a big grant, not for Social Bridges talk. But it's something to think about, that when in the very near future you're applying for enormous amounts of money with your amazing work, these are little things that you could do to make your slides even better. But otherwise, fantastic talk.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the feedback as well. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah, no, I would say something very similar. I thought you did a really good job. You had a really nice introduction. You made it really clear immediately what the relevance of the topic was, and by drawing the audience in, by giving them examples, I thought that was really good. Particularly relevant for me because I've got two siblings who know a lot about art, and that's made me like know nothing about art, but if I go and see a museum with them, I do enjoy it a lot more because they know a lot and they can tell me stuff, and that helps me enjoy it a lot more. But yeah, I just thought it was also a good example of how you used transitions in your slide. Actually, like when you were showing your graphs, you were only showing the parts that you wanted the audience to look at that time, and then you like sort of put the next bit of the data on there, which really helped, I think, like sort of make it clear that that was very well synced with what you were saying. So it was really clear that you were talking about that additional results that then just appeared on your slide. So I thought that was really well done, and that's not always easy to do that. Then you do need to practice that to make it go smooth and make sense, and be very much linked to what you're saying. So I thought that was really good. Yeah, and I agree with the fact that this is actually, like anything I think you can do to reduce in-group preference or out-group bias is definitely impactful, and is something to sort of consider, like spreading, like making that relevant to other topics. But also I'm a developmental psychologist, so I'm always curious what your views are, like for, like it might mean also that firstly children might look at art very differently because they probably don't have much of the background knowledge, and I was curious like what you think for like implications for education, or how you can also in young children maybe even prevent some biases or things like that. So just curious what your thoughts were about that.
Yeah, thank you so much for the feedback, and such a great question. Actually, I love working with kids, and I haven't actually empirically done any research about art with kids, but from what I know of the literature, I think there's evidence to suggest that these kind of biases and prejudices are formed at a young age, but are also very changeable at a young age. And I think it's so important to have this kind of exposure and multicultural art education in primary school. And there's always so much arguments, especially in the US, happening about, how much funding goes into art education, especially in schools. And the first thing that gets cut is funding for the arts and for art education. And I think it's such a shame, because art is such a unique binder that brings people together. I mean, we found that during the pandemic as well, right? Like art was one thing that was bringing people together across cultures. There were like concerts happening with like, people from all over, and people connected on this very, very primary or very fundamental thing that's so close to most of us, if not all of us. And so I think short answer is art education for kids. I think that's just so important, and I think that would really help in terms of reducing biases and prejudices, and even in some instances stopping the forming of these biases, right?
Nice. Thank you.
Okay, I think what a wonderful presentation. I think I can say that I think that I will start working more on the aesthetics of my presentation because of these two talks. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.